The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical prayer as Ashley Cooper clocked in at 11:48 p.m., her badge swinging from a lanyard like a pendulum counting down the hours until dawn. Sacred Heart's emergency department sprawled out before her in shades of institutional grey and pale blue, a cathedral of pain where 3 nurses managed 42 beds on a Wednesday night in Denver. She moved through the corridors like someone trying not to be remembered, her dark hair pulled back so tight it erased her features, her scrubs 2 sizes too large. The ER smelled like antiseptic and desperation, that peculiar blend of bleach and fear that never quite washed out of the walls no matter how many gallons of industrial cleaner the housekeeping staff poured across the tile floors. Her hands were steady. They were always steady now. That hadn't been true in Tikrit, where her hands used to shake so badly she couldn't hold a suture after 18-hour shifts in the combat support hospital. Now they didn't shake at all. Now they moved like machines, precise and efficient, disconnected from whatever lived behind her eyes. She'd spent the last 3 years in civilian nursing learning to make that disconnection invisible, learning to smile when doctors snapped their fingers, learning to say yes, doctor, and of course, doctor instead of giving orders that kept people alive. The adaptive skills of a woman who'd learned to disappear. She pulled on her gloves at Station 3, the night nurse station tucked behind the main trauma bay where the monitors beeped their constant rhythm like an underscore to every decision. The charge nurse tonight was Rebecca, cheerful and competent, who'd already made it clear she didn't much care where the new night shift nurse came from as long as she didn't drop medications or miss a blood draw. Rebecca had been practicing emergency nursing for 6 years. Ashley had been keeping people alive for longer than that, though nobody here knew it. Nobody here knew about the 18 months in Tikrit, the 3 months in Kandahar, the 12 years of service across 2 continents that had left her with scars along her ribs and a tremor in her left hand that only appeared when she wasn't working. Room 4 had been occupied since 9 p.m. with a transfer from the surgical wing. She wouldn't have looked twice at the name on the chart if the face hadn't stopped her cold. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes. The name sat on the admission form in black ink, clinical and impersonal. The face in the photograph clipped to his intake packet was older than the version she carried in the locked compartment of her memory, grayer at the temples, but unmistakable. Commander of the 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. The man who'd written her son's performance evaluations for 18 months. The man who'd put her boy in the field. The man who'd kept him alive. Hayes lay unconscious in the bed, his right leg elevated in a skeletal frame following a training accident at Fort Carson that had fractured his femur in 3 places. The orthopedic team had stabilized him with external fixation, and now he was waiting for the swelling to reduce before they'd commit him to surgery. What should have been routine had slipped into something more complex somewhere between the operating room and the recovery bay, his oxygen saturation drifting, his heart rate climbing in a pattern that didn't match the injury. Ashley moved to his bedside with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She didn't hesitate. She didn't call anyone. She simply pulled on fresh gloves with a sound like quiet thunder, checked his full line, verified his oxygen flow, and began reviewing his recent labs with the intensity of a cryptographer cracking code. 86 beats per minute. Respiratory rate of 22. Oxygen saturation at 91% on 2 liters of nasal cannula. The pieces didn't fit. His injury shouldn't be causing systemic distress. His medications were appropriate. His fluid intake was balanced. She adjusted his oxygen to 3 liters and watched the monitor climb. 93. 94. The subtle shift of a body struggling against something, fighting an invisible enemy. She'd seen this pattern before. She'd seen it in field hospitals in dust storms where blood pressure dropped for reasons the monitors couldn't explain, where soldiers improved and then suddenly didn't, where the invisible sometimes became visible only too late. By 1 a.m., when Dr. Sterling arrived for his morning rounds, Ashley had repositioned Hayes twice, adjusted his oxygen flow, verified his medication interactions 3 times, and spent 43 minutes reviewing his pre-admission vitals against his current status. Hayes remained unconscious, but something in his trajectory had stabilized. Something had caught before it fell. Dr. Sterling moved through the trauma bay like a man who'd learned to occupy space the way other people occupied rooms. His shoes cost more than Ashley's monthly car payment. His watch was some kind of gold that caught the fluorescent light with arrogant precision. He was handsome in the way men who'd never struggled with anything were handsome, symmetrical features unmarked by doubt or difficulty, the kind of face that had learned to smile at the right moments and say the right things and get exactly what it wanted. He didn't acknowledge Ashley as he reviewed Hayes' chart. He didn't need to. Acknowledgement required recognition, and she was the kind of employee who was designed to be invisible. The kind of nurse who worked nights because nobody asked her to work days. The kind of presence that filled gaps and didn't require anyone's attention. But something shifted when he turned to the equipment inventory form clipped to the supply cart at Station 3. Ashley had been filling out the form at 12:34 a.m., logging the standard consumables, noting the stock levels. The orthopedic team had ordered 12 new units of something called the premium-grade surgical assist platform, a piece of equipment that cost $8,400 per unit according to the supply sheet. 12 units. $108,000. For a hospital system that had been talking about cutting nursing hours for the past 2 fiscal years. For a trauma center that reused sterile fields and asked nurses to bring their own stethoscopes from home because the department couldn't afford to replace them. She'd noted the discrepancy on the form. Not challenging. Not questioning. Just penciling in a small notation, verify medical necessity, similar equipment available through existing contracts at $3,200 per unit. 7 sentences worth of curiosity. 7 words that suggested someone had been paying attention. Dr. Sterling stared at her handwriting like it was written in a language he didn't speak. Cooper. Her name was a question mark. He'd used her last name, which meant he'd already bothered to learn it, which meant he'd already noticed her enough to be bothered. You filled this out? Yes, doctor. Her voice came out soft. Deferential. Trained. The voice of someone who'd learned to make themselves smaller than they actually were. Just verifying the necessity. The silence that followed had weight. It pressed down on the station like weather. Rebecca pretended to be very interested in something on her computer. Another nurse, Chen, suddenly found a reason to be in the medication room. The fluorescent lights buzzed their mechanical prayer. Monitors beeped. Somewhere down the corridor, an alarm chimed, the small, manageable kind that didn't require anyone to run. The orthopedic team knows what they need, Sterling said, his voice the careful kind of gentle that preceded something sharp. I don't think we need nursing staff making purchasing recommendations. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't involve the eyes. Especially not on the first week. He set the form down on the counter and walked away. Ashley looked at the form. The pencil notation. 7 words that apparently hadn't been welcome. She'd spent too many years following orders from people with inferior judgment, following protocols written by people who'd never been in the room when someone died because the right equipment wasn't available. But that was another life. That was the life she'd locked away in her car trunk along with the pair of worn combat boots, the one she'd carried through 3 deployments, the one she polished every Sunday morning at 4 a.m. because the routine kept the nightmares at a manageable distance. She deleted the notation from the form. Drew a line through her handwriting. Initialed the correction in the margin, the way you were supposed to do when you made a mistake. Which this apparently was. Her first week at Sacred Heart, and already she'd marked herself as someone who had opinions. Someone who noticed things. Someone who might become a problem. By 2 a.m., she was back at Hayes' bedside. His saturation had held at 94% on 3 liters. His heart rate had settled back to 84. The crisis that might have been brewing had either dissipated or was simply waiting for the next shift to reveal itself. She checked his full line, clean, secured, patent. She verified his oxygen delivery, no kinks, no occlusion, no issues. She looked at the photograph that had slipped from his personal effects bag and fallen beside his pillow. A younger version of him stood in desert camouflage, one arm around a Navy medic whose face was partially obscured by shadow and dust. The medic's hands were steady on Hayes' shoulder. The medic's expression was all business. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Marie Cooper had worn that same expression for 18 years, before she'd learned to smile softly and keep her head down and pretend to be someone smaller than she was. She slipped the photograph back into the bag and checked his vitals one final time. All stable. All within expected parameters. All the invisible work that no one would remember, no one would document in anything but numbers on a chart, no one would ever know had happened between midnight and dawn. The cafeteria at Sacred Heart ER at 11:51 a.m. was a collision of white coats and exhaustion, 40 staff members scattered across tables sticky with spilled coffee and abandoned lunch trays. Ashley pushed open the heavy door with her shoulder, her own tray balanced on one forearm, a habit from field hospitals where both hands stayed ready. The smell of institutional chicken broth mixed with antiseptic floor cleaner, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly pallor that made even the jello look septic. Dr. Sterling sat 3 tables from the entrance, surrounded by the hospital's golden circle, cardiologists, senior residents, the kind of men whose names appeared on plaques donated to the 3rd floor. His voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. "I'm taking bets," he announced, loud enough for the entire cafeteria to freeze, loud enough for the waiting room to hear through the open door. "Our new nurse, let's call her Little Mouse, won't last 7 days. Any takers?" Laughter rippled across his table. A resident Ashley didn't recognize raised his coffee cup. "I'll go 200, she's gone by Friday." Ashley set her tray down on the nearest empty table with deliberate care. One measured breath expanded her chest. She kept her eyes on her food, turkey sandwich, apple slices, a container of yogurt, the inventory of a life trying to stay invisible. The problem with invisibility was that it attracted predators. Invisibility looked like weakness. Invisibility looked like prey. Sterling stood, his movements theatrical, performance disguised as casualness. He was tall, built like someone who paid for a trainer 3 times a week, his hair showing just enough silver to read as distinguished rather than aging. His tie was silk, the kind that cost more than Ashley's first week's pay. He moved toward her table with the fluid arrogance of a man who'd never been told no by an institution that mattered. "What's wrong, Mouse?" His shadow fell across her food. His smile was the smile of someone who'd perfected the art of public cruelty. "Cat got your tongue." He reached past her as if the space around her was his to occupy, his elbow rising in an arc that looked natural until impact. Her tray went horizontal in a single motion, soup cascading across the linoleum in a spreading stain, her apple rolling toward the trash bins, silverware clattering against tile with the specific ring of stainless steel hitting hard floors. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled toward the sound. A doctor 2 tables over had the decency to look away. Most didn't. A single tear escaped Ashley's left eye. She felt it before she saw it, that brief moment where her body's autonomic nervous system betrayed her discipline. She wiped it away without breaking eye contact with Sterling, her hand moving with the precision of someone removing an annoyance, not with the desperation of someone breaking. Her composure had been forged in places where crying meant infection, where emotion meant liability, where the only acceptable response to pain was documentation. Sterling's laugh was genuine pleasure. He pulled a patient chart from his jacket pocket, his jacket, the kind with custom stitching, and released it like a card trick, papers cascading across the spilled soup and scattered silverware. "Pick that up, sweetheart." Ashley's knees found the floor with the muscle memory of 18 years. Not 18 years as a nurse. 18 years before that. Her scrubs darkened where they touched the wet linoleum. Her hands moved through the mess without hesitation, gathering papers with soup-stained fingers, stacking them into coherence. The room had gone silent in that specific way that silence becomes its own sound, the ventilation system humming, the refrigerator hum from the kitchen, 48 humans holding their breath. Her voice emerged steady as stone, carrying the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. "I've been on my knees in worse places for better men." She said it quietly, pitched for his ears alone, but the silence had become so absolute that every word landed like a defibrillator shock. Sterling's laugh continued, a performance of continued dominance, but something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. The briefest flash of a man wondering if he'd just missed something critical, the way a predator sometimes pauses when its prey shows unexpected stillness. Ashley rose, the chart pages dripping, and set them on his table with 2 hands, the gesture formal as a salute. She turned back to the wreckage of her lunch tray without waiting for response. Behind her, Sterling's voice resumed, louder now, more aggressive. That attitude is exactly why you won't last. Sacred Heart doesn't have room for insubordination. We have protocols. Standards. She didn't respond. She pushed her tray into the garbage bin, the wet papers and spilled soup falling away. She washed her hands at the sink, the soap cold, the water running over her wrists, over the thin scars from shrapnel that had missed her radial artery by half an inch during a compound ambush in Tikrit. No one in Sacred Heart knew those scars existed. No one in Sacred Heart knew that the woman they called Mouse had once held a perimeter for 6 consecutive hours while rounds came in from 3 directions, her medical pack empty, her hands the only thing standing between 43 Marines and a body recovery mission. But that wasn't the worst part. The next evening, Sterling found her outside the supply room while she was restocking saline bottles. He stepped into her path with the casualness of someone who'd never considered that a woman might not defer to him. Mouse, these inventory reports you filed? They're questioning MY equipment orders. His finger jabbed the air near her shoulder with each word. That's not your job. Stay in your lane. Ashley continued placing bottles on the shelf, her movements unhurried. The supply room smelled like plastic and sterile packaging and the particular mustiness of a hospital storage area. The equipment order was redundant, she said, her voice conversational. We have 6 of those in functioning condition. The purchase would violate procurement standards. You know what? Sterling's tone shifted, cooling into something more dangerous than anger. You're right. You stay in your lane. Your lane is mopping, filing charts, and being invisible. That's what I hired you for. He turned and walked away, but Ashley heard the calculation in his footsteps. Sterling was a man who understood institutional power. He understood that public humiliation was effective but crude. What came next would be systematic. Institutional. The kind of destruction that looked like bureaucratic process. She was right. The next morning, Ashley found her locker defaced with a hand-drawn cartoon, a mouse in scrubs, exaggerated buck teeth, a stethoscope drawn as a noose around its neck. The image was crude, meant to be funny. The intent was damage. She photographed it with her phone, documented the date and time, and reported it to HR, knowing exactly what would happen next: investigation, conclusion that it was probably just a prank, suggestions that she might be more sensitive than the hospital culture, subtle implications that perhaps she wasn't a good fit. Sterling's announcement came at 6:24 p.m. during shift change, timed perfectly so the maximum number of staff would hear. He stood at the nurse's station with the charge nurse, his voice pitched for casual conversation that somehow projected all the way to the waiting room where visiting hours were still in effect. Little Mouse couldn't handle the big girl hospital, I don't think. I give her 3 more days, tops. Who's going to be my backup on that bet? Ashley continued charting vitals for the patient in bed 7, her pen moving across the electronic tablet with steady pressure. Hayes in room 4 was sleeping, stable vitals, normal sinus rhythm, the kind of textbook recovery that should have been routine. She'd monitored him every 40 minutes for the last 76 hours. No one else on the night shift had spent more than 15 minutes in his room total. But her hands were beginning their familiar tremor. It started in her fingers, a slight oscillation that happened when her nervous system recognized a threat her conscious mind was still processing. Years ago, in the field, it had been suppressed by adrenaline and mission focus. Here, in the fluorescent silence of a Denver hospital, it was harder to contain. She made fists beneath the counter, released, made fists again. The tremor was information. The tremor meant something was coming. The monitors remained steady through 1 a.m. Ashley completed her rounds, checked Hayes' oxygen saturation, 97%, excellent, and logged his medication administration. At 2:13 a.m., when the cafeteria was empty and Sterling was somewhere else in the city, living his life in the spaces where he didn't have to think about competence or protocol or the woman he'd bet wouldn't survive 7 days at Sacred Heart, everything changed. Hayes' monitor alarm became a scream. The monitor alarm screamed like a wounded animal at 2:04 a.m. Not the soft chirp of a routine alert. This was the shriek of a machine that had been betrayed by biology. Ashley's hands moved before her brain caught up. 3 steps from the nursing station to room 4. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and something else, the metallic tang of a body in distress. Lieutenant Hayes was gasping. Not breathing. Gasping like a man drowning in air. His jaw hung slack. His eyes were wide. The skin around his neck showed something Ashley had seen before in the combat hospitals of Tikrit, the subtle but unmistakable deviation of his trachea toward the left. A tension pneumothorax. The lung had collapsed. The pressure inside his chest cavity was rising like a vice slowly tightening around his heart. I need a 14-gauge angiocath. Ashley's voice was steady as a metronome. She didn't raise it. Didn't shout. The charge nurse on duty, Marcus Webb, stared at her from the desk. Now, Marcus. He moved. Hands trembling. The needle was in her palm within 6 seconds. Ashley swabbed the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line with an alcohol prep, and Hayes' eyes locked on hers. The fear in them was the same as the eyes she'd held in Iraq. Young men in older men's bodies. Terrified that this moment, this exact moment right here, was the one where everything ended. Breathe with me, she whispered. After this, you breathe. The catheter went in at a 45-degree angle. There was resistance. Then the unmistakable hiss, the sound of air escaping, of pressure releasing, of physics bending back toward mercy. The needle retracted. The catheter remained. Hayes' oxygen saturation climbed. 68. 72. 78. 84. O2 is 91, Marcus called out. His voice had stopped shaking. The monitor showed sinus rhythm. The breathing had returned. Hayes' eyes were still on Ashley's. He mouthed something. She couldn't hear it over the monitor, over the machinery, over the sound of her own pulse hammering in her ears like a second heartbeat. But she read his lips. Tikrit. The resident arrived 43 seconds later, out of breath, coat half buttoned. Behind him came Dr. Sterling. Not rushed. Not concerned. Composed. His eyes moved from Hayes to the catheter to Ashley's hands, and something crystalline and cold formed in his expression. What exactly happened here? Sterling's voice was smooth as surgical steel. Ashley was still holding the needle. Marcus Webb couldn't meet her eyes. The other night nurse, Jessica, had her hand over her mouth. Tension pneumothorax, Ashley said. Needle decompression. 2 minutes ago. Sterling stepped closer. He looked at the catheter. At Hayes stabilizing vitals. At Ashley. His smile was the smile of a man who had just been handed exactly what he needed. You performed an invasive procedure, he said quietly. Without a physician present. Without authorization. Without a license to perform medicine. He turned to the resident. Paige Hensworth in HR, tell her we have a critical incident. Now. The resident moved like he'd been electrocuted. Sterling was still smiling. You're going to have a lot of explaining to do, Ms. Cooper. A lot. She didn't respond. Just set the needle down with a soft clink against the tray and stood there with her hands at her sides, her posture military straight, her face a mask of professional composure. Inside, something was already calculating. Running scenarios. Counting exits. The call to the hospital board president came at 5:11 a.m. from Dr. Sterling's personal cell phone. Later, when the security camera footage would be reviewed during the investigation that no one would ever actually pursue, it showed Sterling sitting in his office with his feet up on his desk, a cup of expensive coffee steaming beside him, his voice modulated and reasonable and absolutely lethal as he spoke to someone named Harrison who apparently owed him more than one favor. "It's a credibility issue, Harrison." This nurse performed an invasive procedure in the middle of the night. Unauthorized. She was questioned about expensive equipment I ordered last week. Now I'm concerned she was trying to discredit me by creating an incident. It happens. We need to protect the hospital. We need to protect ourselves. A pause. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying her references have been interesting. Inconsistent explanations for her departure from her last 3 positions. I thought someone should ask the hard questions. By 6:13 a.m., Patricia Hensworth from HR had already made 3 calls. One to Denver Community Hospital where Ashley had worked 2 years prior. One to Swedish Medical Center. One to a trauma center in Fort Collins. In each call, Hensworth asked the same careful questions: has she ever shown signs of instability? We're just being thorough. You understand. A new hire we're still evaluating. The people who answered those phones had no way of knowing that Sterling had already been in contact with Hensworth. That the narrative was already written. That the evidence was already being assembled. Patricia Hensworth herself arrived at Sacred Heart at 6:54 a.m., before the morning shift change, while the night crew was still technically on the clock. She was a woman built like a filing cabinet, angular and precise and without apparent mercy. Her briefcase contained printed incident reports that Sterling had prepared in his office over the course of 4 hours. Each report was dated and signed by phantom witnesses. Each one told a story of instability, of judgment issues, of a nurse who had been asking questions where she shouldn't have been asking them. Ashley was escorted to a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor. The fluorescent lights overhead gave everything the color of old bruises. Hensworth spread the documentation across the table like playing cards in a game where all the rules had already been written before Ashley sat down. "The cafeteria incident," Hensworth said. "Not a question. A statement. An unprofessional confrontation with a senior physician. Multiple witnesses. You became emotional. You made cryptic statements. Dr. Sterling characterized your behavior as destabilizing." Ashley sat with her hands folded. She said nothing. "Your questions about departmental supply orders. That's been characterized as insubordinate undermining of departmental authority. We don't hire nurses to second-guess physician decisions." Still nothing. Ashley's jaw was tight enough to crack bone, but her face remained still. The trembling, if it existed anywhere in her body, had no permission to surface where anyone could see it. "And then last night," Hensworth continued, "you performed a needle decompression without physician authorization. You practiced medicine without a license. Ms. Cooper, that's not a gray area. That's a clear violation of hospital policy and Nevada state law." Nevada. Wrong state. But Ashley didn't correct her. She watched as Hensworth pulled out the final report, the one that would matter. The one that had already decided the entire conversation. "Do you have anything to say?" Hensworth's eyes were the color of elevator doors. "In your defense, Lieutenant Hayes is alive because of what I did," Ashley said. Her voice was level. Controlled. A voice like someone reading a weather report. His lung collapsed. "I performed needle decompression at the second intercostal space. Standard protocol. He's breathing. His vitals are stable. That's what matters." Hensworth's expression didn't change. "Mr. Hayes is alive despite what you did, Ms. Cooper. Dr. Sterling stabilized him when he arrived. He's the physician of record. You interfered with a patient in critical condition. You took action that was beyond your scope. That's assault. That's endangerment." The lie was surgical in its precision. The lie was effective because it was so confident, so official, so backed by a hospital that had already decided what it believed. The door opened. Sterling. 2 security guards behind him. He wore an expression of professional concern, like a man who had tried everything else and had finally been forced to this last, necessary step. "I think we're done here," Sterling said. It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the tone of a man who had made 1,000 of them. The security guards escorted Ashley out of the room. Down the corridor. Past the nurse's station where Marcus Webb was writing notes and wouldn't look up. Past Jessica, who suddenly found the supply closet very interesting. Past the room where Hayes was sedated and intubated and unreachable behind a closed door and machines and the authority of a physician whose word had already replaced hers in every record that mattered. But that wasn't the worst part. At the lobby entrance, a security guard named Roy, someone Ashley had actually spoken to twice, once about his daughter in nursing school, handed her a cardboard box. The kind you use to move a life. Inside were her scrubs. Her badge. A mouse cartoon on a coffee mug someone had given her at some other hospital in some other life. "Your employment at Sacred Heart was terminated at 7:23 a.m., Roy said quietly. He couldn't meet her eyes. "You'll receive the separation documents at your home address. 62 hours. That's how long Ashley Cooper had lasted at Sacred Heart ER. 2 days and 14 hours. Sterling had calculated the timeline perfectly. Long enough to establish her competence. Long enough to make her a threat. Long enough that when she tried to defend herself, the narrative he had already prepared would be the only one anyone believed. She carried the box to the parking lot. The Denver morning was beginning to break over the Rocky Mountains with that particular ruthlessness of early spring. The rain from 3 days ago was long gone. The world had already forgotten that she'd ever been there. Her combat boots were still in the trunk of her car, locked away exactly where she'd left them. Still in their case. Still waiting for a war that was supposed to be over. Still covered in the dust of Tikrit and everything that came after. Ashley set the cardboard box on the passenger seat and sat in the driver's seat with her hands on the steering wheel and her eyes on the hospital's entrance. Waiting. For what, she didn't know. For something to shift. For someone to come running out and say that they'd made a mistake. For Hayes to break his way out of sedation and demand the truth. Nothing happened. The morning shift arrived. People got out of cars and walked into Sacred Heart like any other day. Like the rules hadn't just been rewritten. Like the person who had just saved one of their patients wasn't sitting in a car in the parking lot trying to remember how to breathe. The phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Is this Ashley Cooper?" The voice on the other end was female. "Medical. Official. This is Denver VA Medical Center. You have an intake appointment at 10 a.m. this morning for psychiatric evaluation. We have you in the system as requesting treatment for PTSD. Can you confirm your attendance?" The appointment she'd forgotten she'd made. The appointment she'd scheduled 3 weeks ago during a night she couldn't sleep when the past had felt like it was going to drag her under completely. The appointment that was supposed to be at 10 a.m. today, before everything broke. She said yes. She said she'd be there. She ended the call. Then she turned the key. The car started. And Ashley Cooper, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Navy Medical Corps, drove out of the Sacred Heart parking lot at 7:31 a.m. on a Tuesday morning with a cardboard box of her former life on the passenger seat and the sound of her military-issued boots locked away in the trunk like a ghost she couldn't bury and couldn't resurrect. She didn't know yet that in 6 hours, everything would change again. That the waiting room at Denver VA would become the place where the past finally caught up. That the choice between staying silent and speaking would stop being a choice at all. But the hospital had just made that choice for her. 3 days later, Ashley sits in a plastic chair at Denver Veterans Affairs, a waiting room that smells like antiseptic and surrender. The intake clipboard weighs like a weapon in her hands. Around her, men and women in civilian clothes, jeans, baseball caps, hoodies, sit staring at nothing. She recognizes 3 of them. The medic from Sadra City. The corpsman who'd held her hand when shrapnel took out her left eye's depth perception. The radio operator who'd watched her pull a Marine's intestines back into his abdomen with nothing but saline and prayer. None of them recognize her. The weight of her hidden rank presses down like a stone on her chest, like all those years compressed into a single breath she can't release. She's reaching for the intake form when the commotion starts. Shouting from the triage bay. Security running. The double doors burst open and they're dragging in a bleeding man, thrashing, screaming about insurance companies and conspiracies, about someone named Marcus dying, about his father murdered for profit. Blood drips across the linoleum in a trail like a dark road leading nowhere. A nurse holds pressure on his arm while he's still fighting, still screaming that they're all complicit, all murderers. Through the chaos, Ashley hears 3 words that ignite her nervous system like a flare. Sacred Heart Hospital. The man is Hayes' brother. Has to be. The face is similar enough, same jaw, same eyes, but these are dilated, swimming in methamphetamine and paranoia. He's screaming that they killed their father with unnecessary procedures, that his brother Marcus is the next one, that she had to be stopped before she put him down like a dog. Ashley moves before her brain catches up. She's out of the waiting room, through the lobby doors, her car keys already in her hand. The Denver traffic is screaming past on Evans Avenue, but she doesn't see it. Her training has override engaged. 18 years of muscle memory doesn't ask permission. It just acts. The drive to Sacred Heart takes 4 minutes. She breaks 3 traffic laws doing it. Her hands on the steering wheel are steady, the trembling isn't fear, it's restraint, it's the combat instinct that's been sleeping in her bones for 5 years, suddenly wide awake and hunting. Sacred Heart's ER entrance is chaos when she arrives. Security is shouting into radios. A nurse with a bandaged arm is being led to triage. Through the hallway window, she sees him, Hayes' brother, still bleeding, still screaming, still holding a hunting knife that catches the fluorescent light like a piece of broken glass. He's lunging toward room 4. Hayes' bed is only 15 feet away. Ashley doesn't think. Thinking gets you killed. She moves like wind through water, like something predatory and precise. Her body remembers how to do this. Her body remembers everything. She throws herself between the blade and Hayes' bedside. The knife catches her left shoulder first, tearing through muscle and tissue. The pain is white-hot and distant, pain is information, pain is data, and right now her data says, defend. The second lunge comes faster. Her hands are already moving, already redirecting the knife arm, using his momentum and rage against him. The blade finds her right side between ribs, between the 5th and 6th intercostal space, right where it can do maximum damage. Blood floods hot across her skin. She's moving on pure combat training now, controlling his knife arm with a restraint grip that belongs to battlefield medicine, not emergency nursing. Pressure points. Leverage. The attacker's momentum becomes his own prison. They hit the floor together. Hard. His breath and her breath mixing in the small space between violence and survival. Her hands hold him in position, shoulder control, arm isolation, the training from Tikrit before she ever became a nurse, back when she was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Security finally tackles him, finally breaks the tableau. Ashley collapses backward against Hayes' bed frame, and the world swims red at the edges. Her vision is tunneling. There's blood on the tile. Blood on her hands. Blood soaking through her civilian clothes in a spreading dark map of what she just did, who she just revealed herself to be. Hayes' eyes are open. Clear. He's reaching for the call button with one hand while reaching for her with the other, his fingers trembling. "Hold on, Senior Chief," he whispers. His voice cracks like ice in spring. "I called them. Don't move. They're coming. They're coming for you." She doesn't know who he called. She doesn't have time to ask before the morphine drip that the ER nurses are running finds her vein, before the world tilts sideways and she slides into darkness that smells like antiseptic and truth. The next morning brings boots. Ashley wakes in a recovery room with her left shoulder wrapped, her right side wrapped, and her entire body wrapped in the kind of pain that makes breathing feel like betrayal. The morphine is doing its job. The world is soft around the edges. And then she hears it, not through the door, but through the walls themselves, through the bones of the hospital building. Boots on tile. Moving in perfect synchronized rhythm. Hundreds of them. Moving like a heartbeat, like a drumline, like thunder that knows exactly where it's going. She doesn't sit up. She can't. But she listens as the footsteps grow louder, as they fill the hallway outside her room, as they stop. As the door opens, a young Marine captain stands in the doorway in dress blue so crisp they could cut glass. His cover is perfectly positioned. His bearing is parade ground perfect. And his face is a younger version of her own, the same bone structure, the same dark eyes, the same jawline that could split stone. He comes to attention. His hand rises in the sharpest salute Ashley has ever seen, the kind of salute that carries 5 years of wondering where his mother disappeared to, of letters from army bases across the world signed by someone he barely remembered. His voice breaks. Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper. Welcome home. The room fills with people then, a master gunnery sergeant with ribbons heavy across his dress blues like a history of wars. A Navy SEAL commander with a trident pinned over his heart. Hospital staff gathering in the doorway. And somewhere down the hallway, Dr. Sterling's voice cutting off mid-sentence as he realizes what's happening. The master gunnery sergeant places a photograph on her bed. Lieutenant Hayes kept this in his footlocker for 6 years. Thought you should see it. It's from Tikrit. The full image. Her face clear and fierce and young, holding an M4 rifle in one hand while treating a Marine's arm wound with the other. Her eyes are those of someone who has already seen everything she can possibly lose and decided to fight anyway. Her son reaches for her hand. You were his medic, he says. His voice is thick. You were my commanding officer's guardian angel, and I never knew. The SEAL commander opens the file. His voice carries into the hallway where hospital workers have stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped anything except listening. Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action. The room goes silent. The kind of silence that comes right before lightning strikes. 3 purple hearts for wounds sustained in combat. Another pause. In the hallway, feet shuffle. Someone gasps. Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism above and beyond the call of duty in Tikrit, where Senior Chief Petty Officer Ashley Cooper held a defensive perimeter for 6 hours under enemy fire while providing medical aid to 47 wounded Marines, refusing evacuation despite 3 separate shrapnel wounds. Each decoration lands like a hammer on an anvil. Each one rings true. Each one is the sound of someone's life being read aloud like a secret finally told. A Marine Corps general steps forward. His dress blues are so dark they look like midnight made solid. Senior Chief, the Corps doesn't forget its own. 150 Marines outside this hospital are here to thank you for bringing them home alive. 150. She hears them then, realizes she's been hearing them the whole time. The footsteps in the hallway are still moving, still waiting. They're holding formation. They're holding vigil. They're holding her name like a prayer. Down the hallway, Dr. Sterling backs away slowly, his coffee cup still in his hand, his face the color of old bone. The doors burst open at precisely 0800 hours. 150 Marines in dress blues, each crease sharp enough to cut, marched through Sacred Heart's main entrance in perfect formation. Boot heel struck the tile floor with synchronized precision, a sound like distant artillery, deliberate and unstoppable. The morning shift scattered. A nurse dropped a medication tray. An orderly pressed himself against the wall as the column moved past, their uniforms a river of navy blue and dress whites flowing through corridors designed for wheelchairs and 4 stands, not warriors. The lead figure was a master gunnery sergeant. Salt and pepper hair, face like weathered granite, decorations running down his chest like a history of sacrifice written in ribbon. He didn't look left or right. He walked directly to room for 12, where Ashley Cooper lay propped against 2 pillows, her shoulder bandaged, her side wrapped tight enough to restrict breathing, her eyes tracking the sound of boots the way a combat veteran always does, knowing the direction of threat before the threat knows itself. The master gunnery sergeant stood in the doorway. He didn't speak. He just looked at her with the kind of recognition that comes from having served the same country, the same missions, the same cost. Then her son walked in. He was in dress blues too, his collar insignia marking him as a second lieutenant, and he moved with the kind of controlled precision that meant he'd seen things. Seen them and survived them. His eyes found hers and held. For 3 seconds, nobody spoke. The machines beeped. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless drone. The sounds of a hospital going about its business beyond the doorway, pagers chirping, wheels squeaking, someone calling for help on the overhead intercom, all of it faded to nothing. He stood at attention. His right hand rose in a salute that was crisp enough to be lethal. And when his voice came, it cracked, actually cracked, like he was 17 years old again instead of 28, instead of an officer who'd led men through ambushes and held ground under fire. "Senior Chief Petty Officer," he said. The words hung there like a benediction. Like recognition of something that had been hidden so long it had calcified into bone. Ashley's jaw tightened. Her eyes stayed dry. Not because she wasn't feeling anything, her hands proved that, the way they trembled on the blanket despite everything she'd trained herself to be, but because some truths don't require tears. Some truths require witnesses. Behind him, a Navy SEAL commander stepped forward. Tall, built like reinforced concrete, with eyes the color of Atlantic storm water and the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. He carried a folder. Not a medical chart. Not a hospital file. A classification folder with a military seal. "Senior Chief," he said, and his voice was steady as surgical steel. "Your record speaks louder than any introduction. Medal of Valor, 2009, Tikrit. Combat Medicine Specialist, top 1%. Authorized to carry full combat load. Commendation for Leadership Under Fire, 2011. Commendation for Valor, 2012. He paused. The folder opened. Photographs spilled out, Ashley in desert camouflage, Ashley with a stethoscope slung around her neck standing in front of a Humvee, Ashley's hands wrapped in tactical gear holding a casualty. Your decorations have been formally recognized and re-indexed for civilian service cross-reference. He began reading like he was pronouncing a sentence, not a punishment, but a truth finally spoken aloud. Bronze Star. Silence. Silver Star. The breath in the room changed. 2 purple hearts. Someone in the doorway gasped, a nurse who hadn't known, who was just walking past, who didn't understand what she was witnessing. And the Navy Cross, for operations above and beyond the call of duty, Tikrit, 2011, where you maintained perimeter security for 6 hours under sustained enemy fire while managing 7 critical casualties with no support. The folder closed. "Welcome home, Senior Chief." The Marine snapped to attention. 150 uniforms, perfectly aligned, perfectly still. The salute came up like a wave. Then the master gunnery sergeant stepped closer to the bed and set something on Ashley's blanket. A photograph, worn at the edges, folded and refolded so many times the creases had become permanent grooves. It was taken in Tikrit. The medic, younger, harder, wearing the weight of war like a second uniform, knelt beside a casualty, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that comes from saving lives while people tried to take them. And behind her, still in uniform, was Marcus Hayes. Second lieutenant then, injured in that same operation, photographed holding security while a medic worked. He'd kept it. All these years, he'd kept the picture of the woman who'd held ground for him. Down the hallway, somewhere near the administrative offices, near Sterling's corner space with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of downtown Denver that nobody deserved, a security guard carried a cardboard box. Inside, a desk calendar still turned to last week, a coffee mug with a medical school logo, 3 framed photographs of Dr. Sterling at charity galas, his diploma, his medical license, his hospital ID badge. The guard knocked on the office door frame. Sterling sat behind his desk, his face the color of old bone, his hand shaking as he read the email from the FBI that had arrived at 6:44 a.m. 63 counts of Medicare fraud. 47 documented kickback schemes. One federal wire-tapping operation that had been running for 6 months, capturing every conversation, every manipulation, every threat he'd ever made in this office. The guard set the box on the corner of the desk. His voice came out flat, professional, empty of any satisfaction or judgment. "I believe you know the way out, sir." Sterling's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. No words came. The box sat there, heavier than cardboard and tape should allow. The hospital board president stood in the doorway behind the guard, a woman Ashley had never met, a woman who'd listened to Sterling's carefully crafted arguments about protocol violations and patient safety concerns and protecting the institution at 5:56 in the morning 3 days ago. "Dr. Sterling," the board president said, and her voice was the cold precision of a scalpel. "The FBI has been investigating your equipment procurement records for 6 months. Your termination of Nurse Cooper was identified as potential witness intimidation. You are to surrender your hospital credentials immediately and retain legal counsel. Federal agents are currently reviewing all patient files you've accessed in the past 18 months to determine whether any care decisions were influenced by financial incentives." Sterling's hands went white. His knuckles pressed into the desk so hard it looked like the wood might split. Behind him, through the windows, Denver spread out like a painting, the mountains in the distance, the city turning over in its morning routines, indifferent to the fact that his career was ending in real time. An FBI agent appeared in the doorway, credentials already extended. The badge caught the light. The credentials read Special Investigator for the Medicare Fraud Unit. The voice that came next was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "We have emails between you and MedSupply Solutions Incorporated discussing 47% kickbacks on inflated equipment orders. We have purchase orders that were approved by you personally for equipment Sacred Heart never needed. We have testimony from 3 board members stating you encouraged them to expedite your promotion based on financial considerations that you failed to disclose. And we have a recorded conversation from 2 days ago, in which you instructed a colleague to manufacture documentation of protocol violations against a staff member for personal reasons. This is not speculation, Dr. Sterling. This is federal crime." The box sat on the desk. Empty cardboard waiting to carry away the remnants of a career built on theft and intimidation. Sterling's hand reached for it, not to pack it, but to grip something, anything, before he fell completely apart. "The reference checks you initiated on Nurse Cooper," the agent continued, "were documented. Her previous employers are now filing complaints. The HR investigator you worked with, Patricia Hensworth, was a federal plant. Everything she documented about alleged protocol violations has been identified as fabrication based on false medical records you provided. The on-call resident who admitted he'd stabilized Lieutenant Hayes has given testimony that the needle decompression you attempted to discredit was performed with textbook precision and saved that patient's life. Security footage from this hospital shows you entering the supply room at 11 p.m. the night before Nurse Cooper's termination, accessing and printing falsified inventory documentation." Sterling's face had gone beyond white. It had gone translucent, the kind of pale that comes right before the body decides it's done processing reality. His mouth formed words but nothing came out. "Total Medicare fraud over 3 fiscal years, the agent said, closing his laptop. $2.3 million. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, kickback violations, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say." The guard was already reaching for Sterling's arm when the cardiologist tried to stand, his chair clattering backward, his hands up like he was surrendering to something bigger than federal charges. Bigger than the law. Bigger than consequence. The badge on the guard's chest caught the light as he moved Sterling toward the door. And somewhere in the hospital, in a recovery room surrounded by 150 Marines in dress blues, Ashley Cooper heard the commotion, that specific sound of a life ending, the shuffle of feet and the quiet authority of uniformed officers and the realization that power built on lies collapses faster than anyone ever expects. Her son was still standing at attention. The Navy SEAL commander was still holding her file. And in her hands, the worn photograph of Tikrit felt like a key to something, not the past, but the future. The one where she'd survived. The one where the cost of her silence was finally, truly over. What happened next didn't just silence the room, someone would later say, describing that morning to other Marines. It ended a career. But it also brought one back to life. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true value, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Your voice matters. Comment below, would you have forgiven Sterling, or would you have walked away? And share this with someone who needs to know that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding it all together.